January being a barren wasteland when it comes to game releases, I finally decided to suck it up and go back and give Bloodborne another proper go. I've been very uninspired by this game in the past. Every time I've tried to play it, I'd get between 3 and 5 hours in with any character, only to get to the end of a session one day and then completely forget I was playing it the next day. By the time I came back to it months later, I thought I might as well just build a new character and start again. I can't remember where I was going. I don't know what it was, but the game just wouldn't grab me. It wasn't that it wasn't fun. The combat was always very visceral and satisfying. It's not that it wasn't challenging. I was getting my sexy ass handed to me on a silver platter over and over, and encounters with monsters were constantly tense and exciting. It wasn't that I didn't like the environment. I adore the gothic architecture of Yharnam and the spooky atmosphere that the entire game possesses. So what was it that kept failing to grab me, that left me so dismissive and cold? Who can say? I fully expected this pattern to repeat when I went back to Bloodborne this time. So let's begin. I spent a good 20 to 30 minutes making my character, as I usually do, FromSoftware character builders still being rather basic things to play with, so I had to settle on a look in the end, partly because it bugged out. Changes I was making to my character stopped appearing on the character after a while, and I couldn't get this to work again, so I just had to go with what I could see. Not a good start, really. At this point again, I expected to sort of be done with this game within a few hours and not want to play it anymore. A couple of things here before we get into the review. Firstly, the usual request for a like or a subscription if you aren't subscribed already. Also, check out Patreon, please. Pretty please, love you. Secondly, I'm going to cover a lot of what goes down in the game, piece by piece, area by area, so consider this your spoiler warning. Though luckily, it's a FromSoftware game, so even if you do actually play the thing, there's no guarantee you'll understand what the bloody hell is happening. Bloodborne opens with you in a clinic, strapped to a table and getting a blood transfusion. A werewolf tries to eat you, but then as soon as it gets close, it bursts into flames, then little white dudes free you from your binds. You see what I mean? I have no idea how to explain any of this. So you head through the clinic and you see the injured werewolf that tried to chomp on you a minute ago. And here is where you're meant to die. You're meant to get killed by the werewolf. I didn't. Having done this so many times before, I fairly easily managed to beat the werewolf to a pulp with my mighty human fists. You know, dealing maybe 2 or 4 damage at a time, but you know, I still did it. I left the clinic, killed a villager in much the same way, and found a lantern which transported me to the hub, which is the Hunter's Dream. Now, as I said, you were meant to die in the clinic to Wolfie McWerewolf, so when you wake up in the hub, even if you have used a lantern to get back to it rather than dying to get back to it, you wake up as if you have just died here, so I don't feel like the game really expects anyone to live through the area at all. Here is where you get your weapons though, so you do need to come here at least once. This time, I went for the axe. I like the weapons in Bloodborne, not so much the guns, which are piss weak and only really exist for parrying. You stun enemies out of attacks and then you can rip their guts out. Actually, that is pretty cool. No, I mean the melee weapons, they're the ones I love. See, you play as a hunter, and these men and women, they have these trick weapons that can transform in battle. You get your choice of 3 to begin with. There's a sword that becomes a giant cleaver, an axe that goes from a hand axe to a polearm, and a cane with a hidden whip. There are a lot more than this, like this pneumatic stake that I used in one playthrough a few weeks ago? Probably a few months ago now, actually. Time is an illusion, who cares? And I'm pretty sure I saw this one weapon that was just a pole with some spiky wheels on the end. I can't remember if that was something that was real or I made that up, but there's a lot of weapons to choose from. That said, I didn't really bother with any of them. I stuck with the axe, it was the best choice. When in polearm mode, it gets a heavy attack which sends enemies flying, which is delightful, and it's long enough to keep you safe while you're in melee. So, once you've gotten your weapons, it's back to central Yharnam, where you just came from, which had the clinic in it. I should have mentioned that. You wander around the streets, fending off mad villagers. Yharnam is confusingly laid out, which is a reoccurring trend for the game. There is a big central bridge full of werewolves and enemies that leads to the Cleric Beast boss. Now, I spoke with a friend who also played this, and we both reached the logical conclusion that the Cleric Beast was the first main boss of the game. Given the path to it, we decided that we probably had to defeat this one to make actual progress. Only then we both defeated it, and realised we were met with one of the game's many dead ends. The first actual boss is past some dark rooms, through some sewers, and over another bridge. That was irritating, could have saved a lot of time there. Still, killing the Cleric Beast awards a lot of blood echoes, which are used to level up, and some insight, which affects how your character perceives the world around them. The more you have, the more you can see monsters and weird stuff, so yeah, it's an interesting mechanic. And you need at least 1 point of insight on your character to be able to talk to the vital NPC in the hub world that lets you level up. Though at least you can find items in Bloodborne that give you this insight, so you don't necessarily have to defeat a boss just to be able to level up, which is kinda nice, I kinda like it. As much as I love Dark Souls and Demon Souls, having to jump through hoops just to be given access to the ability to level up is a bit of a drag by this point. I mean, you still kinda have to jump through hoops in Bloodborne, but you know, you don't need to kill a god just to be able to power up. So anyway, We make our way to the first real boss, Father Gascione, or Gascoigne, whose name I'm certain I'm pronouncing wrong. I don't know how you're supposed to say it. I'm just going to call him Gascoigne. For the first phase of this fight, he's a human with an axe and a shotgun. Well, I say shotgun, it looks more like a blunderbuss? I think it's a blunderbuss. I wasn't paying a lot of attention to the gun he had because he didn't use it much. But when he becomes too injured, he becomes a werewolf, which was quite cool. There is a tool you can use in this fight that will give you some vital seconds to score some hits on this man. It's a music box that a child in a window gives you. Throughout the game, there are these doors and windows with red lanterns hanging outside, and you can interact with them to speak with the residents within the houses. One of them is a little girl, and she asks you to find her mum. She gives you a music box, it reminds her dad to come home, and basically sends you on your way. So in this boss fight, you use the music box, he hears the music, and he pauses for a minute. He sort of looks like he's in pain and trying to regain his humanity at this point, which I liked. It's another one of those cases of storytelling without storytelling. But more to the point, I could get some free hits on him. And like every FromSoftware game, you need every edge you can get. By now, you also may have noticed something, that when you hit enemies right after they hit you, you can get some health back, which is a really nice feature. It encourages a more aggressive playstyle. I usually go for shields in FromSoftware games. I'm usually quite a defensive player, so having to adjust like this, it was difficult, but it was definitely fun. Anyway, you beat Father Dude and you make your way to the Cathedral Ward, which is a set of stairs and graves patrolled by creepy white-faced dudes and trolls. And here is where the game turns into a bit of a bitch. See, I made my way here through the obvious paths. One leads to a closed door that you simply can't open, it's just closed, it's not locked, it's just closed. I hear the devs were working on an area behind it, but failed to complete it and forgot to remove the door. The other one leads to Old Yharnam, a burned section of city which is overrun with monsters and two mad NPCs who try to kill you. I cheesed both of them to death, by the way. I didn't do it properly. I knocked one off a building and the other one I just hit him from a fence. Pride doesn't keep you breathing. This area is a lot more straightforward in its layout, which I appreciate. There's less looping around 100 times just to figure out which way you're supposed to be fucking going. It's more just progressing along a fairly straightforward path. There are some alternate routes here and there and some shortcuts, but the way forward is clear enough. You get to the bottom of this place and fight the Blood-Starved Beast, a monstrous thing that infects you with the terminally misnamed slow poisoning through its attacks. Slow poisoning? This eats away at my health faster than drinking bleach would. Took me a few tries to beat this prick. I found him difficult to read. I ended up summoning an NPC to help me throughout it. Again, no shame. But eventually I defeated him and felt that sense of accomplishment you get from beating a FromSoftware boss. Only to discover another dead end. Turns out this whole area was optional, so the hour I spent fighting my way through monsters and werewolves was well spent. I suppose at least I could level up so it wasn't all in vain. Do you want to know how I actually progressed here? From the Cathedral Ward checkpoint, I entered through an easily missed doorway to the right of the stairs leading out. I'd forgotten it was there since the last time I played the game. From the doorway you take an elevator up to a tower, which I remembered from last time after I saw it. It had nothing inside that was worthwhile, just a bunch of gun-wielding nutters and a troll. They drop bullets for your guns, sure, but I barely used the thing. I had more ammo in my pocket than the average American high school student. So on a whim, when I got to the tower I headed right and ended up dropping down. I found that this was a way forward. There's a pitch black room inside the tower with some beams to drop onto, and a monster at the bottom. This easily missed way led me forward in the game somehow. How the hell was I supposed to know this? I do not envy the people who had to figure this game out. Which I'm apparently one of because I looked at 0 walkthroughs, I had no idea what I was doing. Oh well, at least now I can get to the boss as a Cathedral Ward, Vicar Amelia, who's a giant white werewolf. I say werewolf a lot in this, but it's not entirely accurate, it's just a frame of reference. A lot of the monsters look like werewolves, so sue me. Vicar Amelia was kind of a fun fight. A little bit of a pain because more than in any other game that FromSoftware have put out, the sheer size of the bosses in Bloodborne, they fill so much of the screen that it's really hard to read their attacks. I found it hard to read their attacks anyway. And I admit with no shame that whenever I could summon the NPC helpers to serve as cannon fodder, I totally did so. I never said that I was good at Dark Souls or Bloodborne or Demon Souls. Anyway, I beat Vicar Amelia. There's a brief cutscene that left me really confused, but most of the cutscenes in the game did, so who cares? And then again discovered there was a dead end. Fuck's sake. So after leveling up at the hub, I go back outside and wander around for a while. I didn't see 2 paths that I'd missed. They weren't that concealed, I was just being stupid, so that one's on me. One to the left of the boss room and one to the right. I head right first. There are these 2 tough NPCs who drained most of my healing items because I suck at parrying, and that's the main thing in the game. I mostly relied on heavy attacks, which eventually worked. I make my way forward a little more, only to get beaten to death by a dude with a sack because I forgot how annoying these enemies are. And I get taken to a whole new area. one that you have no business being in yet, so I'm not entirely sure why the game does it. Might have something to do with optional NPC quests, don't know, don't care. Yargol the Unseen Village is a late game area, you see, and it has all of its main routes locked off until, well, later. So you don't need to be here now. There is a boss you can fight here, Dark Beast Pal, who is a giant terrifying skeleton monster, just gonna leave that in, made of lightning. Though he looked a lot more scary than he actually was. He did beat me several times, I'm not saying he didn't, but then I discovered a very simple trick to defeat him. Stay under his belly and spam the heavy attacks with the axe in polearm mode, and it stuns him out of his lightning mode fairly simply. It was more annoying getting to him after a while because there were these hunched dudes that slit your throat and grab you and you can't escape, and more sack dudes that just beat you to death with ease. Times like this I wish I was actually good at the parrying so I could at least make them into chumps. But anyway, I beat Dark Beast Pal after my 5th or 6th attempt, only to discover that the door he was guarding led back to Old Yharnam, which again is an optional area. Fuck's sake. So I head back to the hub, which I had to keep doing because you can't travel between checkpoints in this game. You have to go back to the hub and then choose a place to travel to, a la Demon's Souls. Only at least Demon's Souls Remake got it right in the end and let you just travel between any checkpoint bit anyway. And from the Vicar Amelia bit, I head right again, avoid the sack dude, and find some snipers and trolls, which were not too much bother. Past those enemies, I got to the bottom of the area to discover some locked doors, and then I am killed in seconds by an invisible cosmic horror. I think I'm starting to get why I didn't tend to stick with this game. It feels like it hates me a lot more than Dark Souls games ever did. Left it is then from the Vicar Amelia boss room. Well, left if you're outside, I should clarify. It's left if you're outside and right if you're outside. I was often travelling to the checkpoint within, so these would be inverted. Anyway, you go left and you get to the first section of the woods, which is actually a pretty decent area. Like Old Yharnam, it was much more clearly laid out. Some bits were more open, but I didn't spend hours wandering in circles just trying to make progress. The woods are full of snipers and dogs, those big trolls with the giant axes, which they look a lot harder than they are. See, most enemies are extremely weak to charged heavy attacks, and you'll always know when your heavy attack is charged. You see this little flash on your weapon, and that means you're basically about to hit like a train. If you can crack one of these off, then even if the enemy have hit you whilst you're charging the attack, you'll do enough damage to get enough of your health back. I do really like this whole get your health back system because it's a good way to conserve healing items. Not that I really needed to. Not because the game wasn't hard, it was, but because the enemies in the early game sections dropped so many that I had plenty in storage. I only started to run out right by the end of the game. I just grinded for more in the starting areas when I did, it wasn't that hard. Apparently the drop rate does drop over time. I never noticed it making much of a difference. The first boss in these woods is this weak little witch. She has like 2 spells that are actually dangerous if you get caught by them, but her main gimmick is that she summons monsters. Only thing is, the summons are based on your character's level of insight. I had quite low insight at this point because I've been using it to summon NPC helpers, so at most only 2 of these monsters would spawn at any given time, and they were no match for a charged heavy attack from my axe. Defeated her, that was fairly simple. Head down the stairs behind her that she was guarding, and what was waiting for me? Do you want to take a guess? Dead end! I actually don't remember which way I went from here to make progress. All I know is after about an hour of wandering around in the woods, I ended up in a different section of woods, full of people with snakes coming out of their faces. Also these tangled balls of snakes. Lots of snakes at this point. Cool area. Cool monsters. Again, it was very straightforward. There were some optional ways to go, some exploring bits, some shortcuts, but it wasn't too hard to determine which way I was supposed to be going, which is always good. The issue of not being able to determine which way you're meant to be going is more of an issue for the main section of Yharnam and the Cathedral Ward, and then later Yargol, the Unseen Village, but we'll get to that when we get to it. There are plenty of areas where it was quite clear which way you were supposed to go, which was nice. Anyway, the next boss. After you fight through some pigs and some other monsters, you get to see the Shadows of Yarnum, which are these 3 dudes in black robes. Oh, piss. Outside of Ornstein and Smo from Dark Souls 1, I really don't like mob bosses. They just don't feel rewarding to fight. They're just a pain in the ass. Actually, I also like the Abyss Watchers from Dark Souls 3. They were alright, but they had more going on in their fights, so it wasn't as Anyway, the individual dudes were squishy enough, but to have any chance of doing this solo, you're gonna need to kill the fireball summoner first and separate the 3, which was kind of difficult. I forget which one it was, but one of them could summon these snakes out of the ground towards the end of the fight if they're left alive, and that was irritating. Luckily, another player was there to lend a hand. I'm never too proud to call on someone else when I'm getting my arse beat, you know that by now. It was lovely. I do like co-op in these games, it's a lot of fun. And, to my absolute shock, this was the right way. I was half expecting there to be a dead end again, but thank the flying spaghetti monster and his son macaroni and cheese, as this was the right way. Up next on our sightseeing tour is Bergenhurst. It's this building that's by a giant lake and is patrolled by these nasty fly monsters who latch onto your face and inflict the frenzy status effect. Frenzy is basically a state that builds up, and if left uncured, it will just do massive damage to the player. It's kind of like blood loss in Dark Souls. It's kind of weird that blood loss isn't in Bloodborne. It's blood as its whole thing anyway. I personally would have been more creative with a state like Frenzy, like maybe inverting the controls that you use when you actively suffer from it, but then I am pure evil. This area also contains one of my least favourite enemies. Well, two, counting the fly monsters, but anyway. There is this one dude who sucks your brain out, dealing huge damage and basically draining some insight from you when he does it. If he grabs you, there's no way out, and this brings me to a complaint that I've wanted to bring up for a while now. Way too many enemies in this game have grab attacks that are impossible to free yourself from once you're caught. At least by Dark Souls 3, we get some which can be escaped if you mash the shoulder buttons. This brain sucky dude never reappeared when I played. Like, I never saw him in later areas. He just seems to be placed in this one area to fuck with the player. I have heard that there are more in the DLC, which I didn't try. Maybe I'll go back and look at it later. I do kind of want to, I am intrigued. Anyway, past him, there are more fly monsters, fuck them, and there's this centipede demon thing with a mouth for a face. He was cool, I liked him. In fact, I like a lot of the monster design in this game, like even the fly monsters, I think they look interesting. There's so many delightfully dark creatures, and they all have this messy quality, which really gives this, well, it kind of lends into the idea that you're experiencing a nightmare, and it's getting worse and worse, because there's these bulging eyes and these malformed limbs. I love it, it's beautiful. There's another NPC here you have to fight who has magic. I never figured out how to use magic myself in Bloodborne, but then I don't really mind. I got through the game well enough without it. Besides, I often find such builds, you know, like mage builds, they tend to trivialise the experience to a degree, and I don't play these games to plough through with ease. I play them to remind myself of how much I suck. The boss of this area is Rom the Vacuous Spider. Interesting name for a fairly simple boss. He summons small spiders to hurt you, which are the bigger danger. He does have the occasional magic spell he'll throw at you, which is mostly like ice and I think like a shockwave, but he's not that tough. One thing you do need to know fighting him is don't hit him in the head, hit him in the body. He takes less damage on the head. Once he's dead, you wind up in the Nightmare of Menses. Well, first a school building full of creepy teachers and then into the nightmare proper. The more I play this game, by the way, the more I agree with something said by James Stephanie Sterling of the Jimquisition. See, whilst Bloodborne is an action RPG, pretty good one by the way, it has a lot in common with survival horror, and that as a genre I think tends to miss the point a lot. From Bloodborne's oppressive atmosphere to the horrific designs of some of these monsters, to the sheer brutality and how you die if you make a wrong move, and how sometimes just running away is a viable strategy, I'd agree with the statement. There is a lot of survival going on here. Anyway, I just wanted to bring that up. I thought it was a good point. I like the idea of Bloodborne being as much survival horror as it is an action RPG. The Nightmare of Menses is an absolute pain. There are these skull rocks that inflict frenzy just for being near them, and several somehow more fucked up versions of werewolves with vertical mouths and worms inside them. Follow that up with trolls and a giant spider that you've got to deal with, and this whole area is just oh god, it's a drag. At least the kids in the building following this section, they're not too bad. Like, they do a bit of damage, but like they're fairly easy. It's a fairly simple gameplay section after that bit, and there are these big monsters that are very easily parried. The first boss of this place is this dude with a cage for a head. He runs around, summons puppets, and occasionally tries to tentacle you to death. He wasn't remotely challenging. It's basically a big game of hide and seek and tag mixed together, just running around in circles for ages. It's not fun at all. Anyway, after he's dead, you go wading through the rest of the area, past the pig monsters and the copy-pastes of the Shadows of Yarnum boss from earlier. I really hate it when games do that. Like, Dark Souls Remastered did that a lot. Like, you see the Capra demon and the Taurus demon, like, reappearing as basic enemies. Like, just design an enemy, for fuck's sake. But at least when you get past all this, we encounter what is currently my favourite boss of the game, the Wet Nurse. I can't remember her full name, it's probably on screen right now. She's this blade-wielding, multi-armed nightmare monster. She was a hell of a fight. I liked her a lot. I don't know what it was. There's just something about this boss I thought was really cool. The creepy backing track, which sounded a lot like a children's music box, did a lot to help the atmosphere of this fight. I think that was part of the reason I loved it. It was like, you just hear this like creepy ding 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 sort of noises in the background, and she walks towards you swinging her blades madly, and getting behind her is the way. Anyway, I just liked the fight. That's the point. I loved this fight. It was a cool fight. Even when she started cloning herself, the clones didn't stick around very long, and yeah, it was fine. It was a cool fight. I liked it. After she's dead, we go back to the Unseen Village, which I can finally progress through. The streets are now littered with monsters made up of multiple bodies smashed together, and there are some basic enemies that are summoned by other enemies here, which, you know, it's fair enough, it's not too bad. The layout was a bit irritating. It took me a while to figure out which way was forward, and, you know, a lot of the streets in Yharnam and Bloodborne in general just look the same, so it's easy to get lost in. Still, once I did figure out which way to go forward, I found the boss, which was a slightly bigger collection of bodies and a relatively straightforward fight. He could hit fairly hard, but a few hits from my axe did the job, really. The NPC support dude I had didn't seem to do much. I mean, he drew the fire from the weird fire summoners who were, like, standing on ledges around us, but they weren't a big deal anyway, so yeah, it was a fairly simple fight. Bit of a shame. Once he was defeated, we come to the end game. It's time for another one of those awkward corrections I do in the middle of a video rather than rewriting a script. Basically, I'm pretty sure that the Nightmare of Menses, it comes after Yargol the Unseen Village. I somehow forgot this in the 3 or 4 days since I played it, because I'm an idiot, you should know that by now. So, those last 2 bits, swap them around, that way it's in the right order. I apologise, I'm stupid. Now, if you do certain things like this player I'm playing with in the footage now, you'll encounter the Moon Presence, which is the true final boss, and judging by those tentacles, probably also a prominent Japanese porn star. If you don't do that, you get Gurman. Until now, he was just this dude in a wheelchair who sits in the Hunter's Dream hub world and he spouts exposition at you. You go to him and he gives you a choice. Let him behead you to end the dream, or you fight to the death. I chose the latter because, from what I heard, I really wanted to experience this fight, and I'm really glad I did. He is fast and dangerous with changing movesets and a nice looking boss arena. I like the track as well, the music track that plays along with it. It's really nice. This drained a lot of my health potions this fight, like even the ones I had in storage I was going through like mad. He was so quick and elegant. It was wonderful. I really liked this fight. I did have to, you know, break away and go farming for goodies because I had no health potions left after a while, but I liked it. After I beat him, I became the wheelchair-bound hunter person who lives in the dream, and that's where the game ended. I have no idea if that was the good ending, or if there is a good ending, because it's a FromSoftware game. I've got no idea. But I do have to admit, I had a lot of fun this time around. I know I've sounded a bit negative through certain areas, but I really enjoyed it this time. I don't understand much about the story of Bloodborne, aside from tainted blood being the reason that monsters are happening. That's the sort of understanding I have, but I don't really care enough to look it up. I find something uninteresting about the lore of Bloodborne in general. Maybe it's just the ruthless repetition of the word blood in as many places as the writers feel they could get away with. It's everywhere blood. You got blood echoes, which stand in for souls, the level up tool I mentioned earlier. Blood vials, which are your healing items. Blood gems, which are for upgrades. It's just all starts to blur together after a while. It's all just blood, blood, bloodity blood. But that's a fairly small complaint, I feel. Whilst I do have my main complaints, which, you know, I've already voiced, I actually really enjoyed Bloodborne, and I'm so glad I got into it. After Demon's Souls, I'm really happy to be playing a game that has generous checkpoints and shortcuts with no weight limits. Also, it has jumping attacks and plunging attacks. I miss these a lot. The game is really good. It still won't take Dark Souls' place as my favourite FromSoftware title, but I am a lot more into it now than I ever was before. Many of my sessions ended hours after I initially intended them to. It's been a while since I played a game long past my bedtime, and this time around I even looked forward to my next session with Bloodborne, which I never did previously. I will admit that if January wasn't as dead as it is, I probably wouldn't have, because like I didn't really care. Like I've even said in my top 5 Dark Souls list, top 5 Dark Souls list? No, top 5 Souls-likes list, that I didn't really care for Bloodborne, but now I probably would put it on the list. Probably in like, probably in like 3rd place? Yeah, third place. I'd probably go in 3rd place. Whilst the map layout of some areas is horrible and the game does a poor job of explaining shit like any FromSoftware game does, there is something very engaging about Bloodborne. Visceral combat, brutal challenge, a fantastic atmosphere. Even if some of the places do look a bit similar, you know, like building-wise, I love the architecture in the game and the exploration of most areas, so I can forgive that. If you haven't yet, I do recommend getting a copy of Bloodborne. It is a PS exclusive still, as far as I know. It might have a PC port. I can't remember if it's one of the games that was ported. So you will at least need a PS4 to play it. Also, seems relevant, you might care about this more than I do, but the game is capped at 30 FPS. I hear the game was built around this, so even the PS5 doesn't change this. Like I said though, I care too little about frame rate. As long as I can see what I'm doing, I'm happy. The overall thing to take away from this review is that Bloodborne is well worth your time if you like Souls-like games. No, I still won't call it Soulsborne, that just sounds silly to me.